All right, welcome back to another one of these types of videos where we take a deeper look into currently unfolding events of the Russo-Ukrainian war. We take a look at the map and we analyze it more in depth. The Ukrainian invasion of Kursk Oblast is most certainly one of these cases where we need to talk about it more, because looking at the surface is one thing and looking more in depth, it's a totally different narrative. Also, looking at the Russian perspective gives us the answer, I think, to what looks like an underwhelming response to an invasion of their own country. Now, this is very historic. This is actually the first foreign invasion of Russia since 1943, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union during World War II. That was, what, like 81 years ago? So this is history unfolding right before our eyes. Where to start? All right, here to start. We all were taken by surprise by the fact that Ukraine had it in them to launch a new offensive. Not to mention a successful offensive. The last one was last summer, the Ukrainian counteroffensive that was a total failure. And basically, most of us, I know I did, thought that, well, that's probably it for Ukraine for the foreseeable future. What's going to happen now is that Russia is going to slowly grind them down and until they come to the negotiation table. And that is what's been happening. There's been basically no Ukrainian victories. Minor successes here and there, but mostly Russian advancements in Donetsk. So you remember the fall of Avdiivka, that's this one here. That was in February. Then they were able to exploit Ukrainian disorganization to take Ocheretne, and then they've just taken lots of villages here. Quite slowly, but very steadily. And that continues. They are having a momentum and they are aiming for Pokrovsk. So remember Pokrovsk for the future, because I believe for sure there will be a battle of Pokrovsk unless something drastically is changing. Like maybe an invasion of Russia. So let's talk about that. Oh, here it is. So basically what's been happening since the failure of the Ukrainian summer counteroffensive that basically ended in early November last year, I'd say. Like I said, Russians have been advancing in the south, but Ukrainians, and we've all known this, the Russians have known this, the Ukrainians have been building up forces in the north. And what we all thought was the reason behind that is that Russia would launch another invasion to distract the Ukrainians. They did that in Kharkiv this spring, or was it early summer? Somewhere there. So the logical next step would be that Russia would probably invade Sumy. That was the next target if they were to launch a new offensive. So the Ukrainians were building up forces here, and the Russians didn't really react to it because they obviously knew it was for defense. We all knew that Ukraine didn't have it in them to launch a new offensive. But joke's on us all, because we were all taken by surprise. Military experts, as well as just regular followers of the war. Ukraine invaded Kursk Oblast. Why Kursk Oblast of all places? The answer to that is quite simple, I think. There's no reason apart from that they could. The Russian forces there were just border guards and conscripts, low quality, unmotivated, unprepared. They didn't think it was going to happen. So they failed to fall back to their secondary defensive lines, and Ukrainian forces has been able to exploit it. Also, the Ukrainian tactic seems to be here that they advance, and when they meet Russian resistance, as they now have begun to do in force, they stop and advance in a completely different direction. That's what's happening when we look at this salient here and also this one here. The Russians were able to stop them here in the west and also here in the east of Sucha. This is this town here. So the Ukrainians started advancing north and down here instead. That's what it's looking like right now. Another interesting thing about this sector of the front is that Ukraine doesn't report to us on the events here. They don't say much. All information we get, basically, well, not all, but most of it. For example, when we learned that Ukrainian forces have entered Snagost, that's the Russians telling us this. They themselves claim that Ukrainian forces is this and this village, and that's unusual, and I honestly don't know why. I don't know why the Russians are so transparent with the losses, because this is humiliating to Russia. This is a bad propaganda defeat, and a big one for Ukraine. This really gives the Ukrainian people or forces morale, because it shows that Ukraine has it in them to launch offensive still. The war is not over. It's not a slow grinding down of Ukrainian forces and personnel until they come to the negotiation table. They still have cards left to play, and they certainly did with this one. So the Russian response to this has been significantly, notably underwhelming. And you would be surprised by that, because Russia can't have Ukrainian forces, foreign forces invading Russia for the first time since World War II. That doesn't look good to Russia. So already this is humiliating for Russia. Let's get that across. So why aren't they responding like crazy, sending all they have to just like push the Ukrainians back across the border and like call it a loss, but at least they managed to repel it, and that's that. I have the answer, I think. Taking a look at Ukrainian sources, Western sources, and Russian sources together, we get the full picture. Because we know from both sides that Russia is not sending their forces from Ukraine to repel the Kursk incursion. Why? Why, when their own land is being invaded, why not prioritize that? I have the answer, and it's quite complicated. I call it the Pokrovsk-Kursk gambit. It's a calculated move by Russia not to send forces from Ukraine to their own land to repel it. Because, like I said earlier, Russia has been having a continuous momentum going here in Donetsk. From Avdiivka to Ocheretino, here now to Pokrovsk. This is the next battle. If they were to send forces from Ukraine to Kursk, they would lose this momentum most likely. That would be a double defeat, because this is already a loss. Even if they repel it, it's a loss for Russia. It's a propaganda defeat. Losing the momentum, the one momentum actually sort of that they have in Ukraine. Well, they have some success here in Luhansk too, but that's nothing significant because it's not many cities up there, none really, that they're threatening right now. So losing this momentum towards Pokrovsk, that's two defeats in that case, if you understand how I mean. The first defeat would be, well, they've already suffered the first defeat, getting invaded. The second defeat would be losing the momentum. So instead, Russia, I'm pretty certain, makes a very calculated and honestly the right move, I would say, to keep their success in Donetsk going. They're not letting this defeat develop into two losses. They keep what they have going for them and respond to this by sending their conscripts instead. We don't know what the conscripts are fighting like. We don't know the quality of them. That remains to be seen. Will they be able to push this back? In the beginning, in the early days of, well, it's still early days, but in the first days of the Ukrainian invasion here, I thought it was just a temporary incursion and they would fall back willingly. Now I actually think that they aim to hold it in the long term as a bargaining chip to say to Russia at the negotiation table, well, yes, you have lots of our country, but we actually have some of your country. What will you do about that? That's a game changer in the negotiation table. So Russia is keeping going. Is that how you say it? For Pokrovsk. And it's even deeper than that, because let's say Russia will likely retake their land sooner or later, but also be able to take Pokrovsk in Donetsk, that is actually, well, in the Ukrainians' eyes, Ukrainian land. They basically turn what is one defeat and one victory for Russia into a simultaneous double defeat for Ukraine. Because how do you think it looks to the Ukrainian people and forces if they are being pushed back here in Ukraine and they failed their own offensive in Ukraine earlier, but they managed to take Russian land and then they lose it along with Pokrovsk. So then they will start asking the leadership, why did you even bother invading Kursk when you can't even defend our own land? That's a waste of resources, that's mismanagement of the forces, that's a bad leadership. That's what it will look like if Russia is able to take both Pokrovsk and take back the Kursk lands. And I think that's the key thing to understand here. That this is probably a calculated move to, at all costs, keep the Donetsk momentum going and then deal with Kursk when they can. They are focusing on it, but not all in, as you would imagine a paranoid state like Russia would react. They're actually, I think, don't assume that this is incompetence on the Russian part. Well, it is, because it's strange. It's surprising that the Ukrainians were able to get this far. They took probably double the amount of the Kharkiv offensive here in probably half the amount of time. So it's already good for Ukraine this far. But let's see what happens. So keep that in mind going forward, that the Pokrovsk offensive, the momentum that the Russian forces have in Donetsk, is deeply tied to the Ukrainian incursion of Kursk. And it can develop into one strange and humiliating loss for Russia if the Ukrainians keep the land here, or if things go Russia's way, it can turn into a double defeat for Ukraine, and who knows what's happening after that. That's what I wanted to tell you with this video. The Pokrovsk-Kursk gambit. Thank you for watching. We'll keep track on this development. Might make more of these videos. Have a good one. Vlogged out.